So yeah, hey guys, I'm Noah Prince. I'm a protocol engineer at Helium. So all the stuff that touches the Solana blockchain is the stuff that I work with. Today I'm going to give you a crash course in our token, HNT, the Helium Network token, and sort of how that works. So yeah, HNT, we call it the currency for connectivity. I think probably a good place to start here before going deep into how the token works is just a refresher on what Helium actually is. Today I'm not going to focus so much on the IoT network. I'm going to focus mainly on the mobile network because I think it's just easier to reason about. So the mobile network you can think of as kind of one giant Wi-Fi network that anybody can deploy into, and then people can join via carriers like Helium Mobile or AT&T. And this network has tremendous amount of usage. We have, actually these stats are outdated. There's over 2.1 million users connecting to it every day. Most of those users have no idea that they're connecting to our network. I think one of the interesting things about this network is that coverage tends to be concentrated in places like this where you have a lot of slow-moving foot traffic. And so even though we don't have that many hotspots, we have a huge amount of data that's traveling over the network because we've deployed in these kind of key locations. So probably an easier way to think about it is a concrete example. You go into a coffee shop and it's surrounded by brick walls. The coverage is terrible. You're trying to post a review or post about this coffee shop on social media, and the coverage sucks. You can't post a picture. You can't even doom scroll Twitter, which is what we're all here to do anyway. So it sucks for you. It sucks for the coffee shop because they don't go and get that review. Now the solution to this tends to be the coffee shop has some kind of Wi-Fi network set up to fill this gap. But then you have to ask them for the password, and none of us like socializing, so it's not great. Now with Helium, they install a hotspot. All of a sudden, if you're on AT&T or another large carrier in the US, which I don't know if I'm allowed to mention by name, you just automatically connect. You don't even realize that you're using the Helium network, which means you can post reviews, you can do whatever you want. It's great for you. It's great for the coffee shop owner because they're getting paid for this, and you have better coverage. And it's actually great for the carriers because their towers just can't penetrate into these areas, and they don't have a good way to go deploy at all these coffee shops. Now let's take a step back. One coffee shop is cool, but let's imagine we lined an entire business district with these, or like in New York where we have Link NYC, all of the old telephone booths in New York have been converted into Helium hotspots. So as you're walking down the street in New York, you're just constantly connected to Helium hotspots. That's the dream. It's this coordination layer where you can just connect to everything automatically. No more asking for passwords. And how do we tie this all together? With HNT. So I think the first thing that usually comes up when you talk about a token, and honestly everybody should ask this question about every token they're looking to get into, is why a token, right? Why not just use USD? I think the first most obvious problem is using US dollars to pay people is weirdly expensive. You have to have deals with banks. You have to have a custody provider. You have to have a whole compliance department. It's just a mess. But still, the next question would be, okay, that's annoying. You probably do need crypto rails for this because we want millions of hotspots. Why not USDC? And I think the big thing with DePIN specifically like Helium is this cold start problem. When there's 0 hotspots and 0 users, well, first of all, nobody wants to be the first user to sign up. There's no coverage. And at the same time, nobody wants to be the first person that deploys a hotspot because if you're getting paid in USD for people using the network and there's no one using the network yet, well, there's no incentive for you to deploy. And so crypto actually really helps with this cold start problem because instead of paying them in USD, you're paying them in a token that should give them ownership and long-term alignment. And so that's what happens, right? The first deployer, they're taking a lot of risk, but because they're taking a lot of risk, they earn a lot of ownership via HNT in the network. And And so, you really are better off deploying early. And I think a misconception here when I show statistics like, we have terabytes and terabytes of data and millions of users is that we're not early anymore. You're absolutely, I think for the United States alone, we would probably need around 30 million hotspots. We have 150,000 hotspots. So there's still tremendous opportunity here. So when designing the token, really what you need to make sure is that there's alignment. Obviously, by owning the token, you get kind of a say in what the network does via governance, but you also want alignment. Ideally, you want to have the property that more usage means the network is more valuable. And I think if you're going to take one thing away from this talk, it's the economics of Helium are actually really, really simple. You can explain it in one sentence. Deployers earn HNT for providing useful coverage, and the people using that coverage, namely big carriers, burn HNT for that coverage. And so what ends up happening economically is as the network is used, as people are, as AT&T or Helium Mobile is paying to use the network, HNT gets burned, it gets removed from circulation, but that demand is still there, which means you have more demand for the remaining tokens. And that means that holders benefit from the network being used, which is the property that we wanted. We wanted this token to be aligned with more network usage. So, can't talk about the token without the basic stats. I'm a Solana nerd, and the program or the token is now deployed on Solana since 2023. If you've been around for longer than that, we had our own blockchain for a while, but we're not going to talk about that. There's a hard cap of 223 million HNT. So there will never be more than that number. And actually, at this point, there's going to be less than that because tokens are getting burned. The way we guarantee that we only have a max supply is the same way Bitcoin does it, which is via halvenings. So right now, around 20,000 HNT gets emitted every day. In 2 years, 10,000 HNT will be emitted every day. To those people that are astute and paying attention, you might notice that this has sort of a similar problem that Bitcoin has, which is eventually you end up with fewer and fewer tokens, which means less and less incentive to mine. And the creators of the Helium token actually came up with a really creative solution to this, which I will go through later. So the next kind of problem that you need to solve is cryptocurrencies are in themselves kind of volatile, right? And if you're AT&T, you're trying to use a network, you don't care about what a token price is, right? You want stable costs. You want to say, okay, I'm willing to pay you 50 cents a gigabyte to transit data on this network. I don't care what HNT is worth. And so HNT and Helium have this concept of a data credit where in order to get basically 1 gigabyte of data, you need to burn 50 cents of HNT. And so if you burn, let's say $1 of HNT, you get 100,000 data credits, which are worth $1. So in that way, the prices to use the network are stable pegged. So you get a very predictable cost to use the network, but the token itself gets burned at whatever price. And you can do really cool things with this, like hide from these carriers the fact that HNT is even involved at all. We have this portal where we partnered with this company called Sphere. You can actually put credit card information in, pay directly USD for the data you're transmitting over the IoT network, and in the background, it's using Solana to go swap that USDC for HNT, burn that HNT into data credits, and then burn those data credits for using the network. But it's just a useful abstraction. And so I think probably one of the coolest parts of HNT now is people have been speculating on crypto economics forever, and the Helium token has been around since, I think, 2019 when these economics were designed. But everybody was just, guessing what was going to happen. But now that we have real revenue, we're burning around $400,000 a week in revenue, you can actually see some of these principles start to happen. And so Blockworks was kind enough to put together this dashboard on Helium revenue, and you can actually see where as the Helium revenue started ramping up, the total data credits burned went up. On some days, the amount of HNT emitted was actually negative. Like you saw fewer HNT than the day before, which is really interesting and sort of gets to the core of what the design of the protocol should be long term. So yeah, you have, this is sort of the life cycle of Helium, right? You have carriers go and they acquire HNT so that they can pass data over the network. They burn that HNT, they get data credits, and when they're doing that, eventually, on a daily basis, HNT gets emitted to hotspot deployers. Mentioned on here is this thing called net emissions. And remember when I talked about earlier with the halvenings, with halvenings you could eventually have HNT go down to, let's say, 100 HNT being emitted a day. And maybe that's not enough to incentivize deployers. The protocol creators of HNT did this really clever thing where they created something called net emissions, which sounds complicated, but all it is it says that around 1,600 HNT every day can get re-emitted if it was burned. So concretely, if there was 500 HNT worth of demand for that day, it could re-emit 500 HNT to deployers. If 1,600 HNT was in demand for that day, you could emit 1,600 HNT to deployers. But interestingly, if there was 2,000 HNT worth of demand, 400 gets burned permanently. And that's why when you look at that chart from the previous page from Blockworks, you can see that on some days we're actually going deflationary, and net emissions allows that. Now, long term, we'll see there are people who have speculated on there being a mint and burn equilibrium where at the long tail of the network, so let's say Helium has halved a bunch of times because it's been 50 years, eventually you should see the amount of demand equal the amount of HNT that is emitted. So there's 1,600 HNT of usage and 1,600 gets emitted. And there's an equilibrium, and if demand goes up, you would expect to see HNT gets burned until that equilibrium gets hit again, which is kind of a cool concept, and actually I think should be the litmus test for most crypto protocols. Everybody just assumes you're going to have infinite emissions forever, but you really should be considering what happens on the long tail. Well, on the long tail, the value in should very well equal the value out. The amount of demand that's coming from carriers to use the network should exactly equal the amount that's getting paid out to hotspot deployers. So I've talked a lot about the demand side and how tokens get burned. This wouldn't be a talk about the tokenomics without talking too about how they get emitted, who they get emitted to. So this gets a little bit complicated for Helium specifically because we're a network of networks, as I mentioned, and others have mentioned up here. We have the IoT network and the mobile network. And so one of the first things that we ask people who stake our token and have voting power to do is decide how much HNT should go to each network. It's a thing called delegation. I don't need to go too much over it, but basically delegators have decided that around 87% of HNT should go to mobile, and then 17% should go, or 13%, I swear I can do math, should go to IoT. Now after that goes through sort of that splitter, then it goes to a network, and in the case of the mobile network, there's basically two actors. There's service providers, so that's Nova Labs, which is the company that operates Helium Mobile, and any other carriers that join the network receive some HNT. And the majority of HNT goes to people that deploy hotspots. And in particular, hotspots receive HNT in two ways. The first way is called proof of coverage. If you recall, when you're starting a network, you don't have very many users, and so you can't necessarily pay people for data transfer because there isn't very much data transfer. In that case, people are just proving that they've provided coverage in this area, and if there were users, theoretically, they would have provided to them and they get rewarded for it. Realistically, proof of coverage doesn't need to happen as much anymore because we have these millions of users connecting every single day. If you deploy a hotspot in a good location, it will get used. And so the second way that people get paid is when they actually transit data. And we try to pay them the 50 cents a gigabyte. There are some circumstances where, depending on the price of HNT, we can't give them 50 cents a gigabyte in HNT, but most of the time that is the case. And if there's any HNT left over after paying people their 50 cents a gigabyte, then proof of coverage gets paid out. For the most part, right now, I think it's mostly data transfer that's getting paid out, not proof of coverage. So yeah, that is HNT's economics in a nutshell. But yeah, if anybody has any questions in the audience, I can answer them. Otherwise, thank you.